I never thought the sharpest wound of my life would come from within my own family. My name is Maria. I'm a grandmother, and for decades I poured every drop of my heart into raising my son and helping him build a life of dignity. But one day, at a family gathering filled with people I trusted, my daughter-in-law turned on me. Her voice, sharp, humiliating, merciless, cut through the room and left me trembling with shame. That moment shattered everything I believed about family. Before we continue, kindly hit the subscribe button, leave a comment below, and let me know where you're watching from. Have you ever been betrayed by those you loved most? Share your story below. My name is Maria, and most days, my life feels as quiet as the soft ticking of the clock on my kitchen wall. I wake before the sun, long before the neighborhood stirs, when the air outside still carries that cool dampness of the night. I slip on my worn apron, the one embroidered with fading roses, and I step into my small garden. There, among the rows of tomatoes, herbs, and roses, I feel closest to peace. The soil has a smell I can never describe, earthy, comforting, alive. I run my fingers over the leaves, whispering little prayers that the plants will flourish. Sometimes I imagine my late husband standing beside me, nodding silently the way he used to when he was proud of me. It has been 12 years since he left this world, yet the emptiness beside me in bed feels just as heavy as it did that first night. After tending the garden, I move into the kitchen. The kettle whistles, and the sound is sharp but familiar. I brew strong coffee the way I've always liked it, filling the air with that rich, bitter aroma. My hands move on instinct, slicing bread, whisking eggs, preparing a meal not just for myself, but for whoever might walk through my door. Feeding people has always been my love language. I suppose that's why family dinners matter so much to me. They aren't just meals, they're rituals of belonging, of togetherness. On days when my son, David, visits with the children, my house bursts to life. Their laughter fills every corner, bouncing off the walls like sunlight breaking through curtains. I live for those moments, the sound of tiny feet running through my hallway, the sticky little hands reaching for my face. My heart swells each time I hear them call me abuela. And then there's David, my only son, my greatest pride. He grew into the kind of man I once dreamed about in the long, lonely nights after his father's death. Responsible, hard-working, kind. I still remember selling my wedding ring just to pay for his textbooks in college. He promised me then, with tears in his eyes, "Mama, one day I'll make it all worth it," and in so many ways he has. Yet when the children's laughter fades, when David leaves, silence returns. It presses against me heavy, reminding me of the life I once shared with someone who's no longer here. I try to ignore it, to drown it out with the clinking of dishes or the hum of old songs on the radio. But silence always finds me. Still, I tell myself, this is a good life. A simple, quiet life, but deep in my heart, a whisper lingered. A whisper I refused to hear, because behind this quiet life, a storm was already brewing. When I think back to my younger years, I still see the shadows of struggle painted across them. I became a widow far too soon. David was only 8 years old when I lost his father, and in that single night, the weight of the world shifted onto my shoulders. I remember sitting at our small wooden table, my hands trembling as I counted the coins I had left. Rent, food, school fees. Every number felt heavier than the last. Yet when I looked into David's wide, tearful eyes, I knew failure wasn't an option. He needed me, and that truth alone kept me moving. I took every job I could, cleaning houses during the day, mending clothes at night. My fingers cracked from scrubbing floors, my back ached from bending over endless piles of laundry, but I carried on. There were nights I stitched by candlelight until my eyes blurred, just to earn a few extra pesos. The smell of bleach and soap clung to my hands. Even when I finally lay down to rest, there were sacrifices no one ever saw. The jewelry my husband had gifted me on our 10th anniversary, the last piece of gold I owned, I pawned it to buy David's school books. I told him it was only for safekeeping, though the truth burned inside me. He found out years later, and I'll never forget how he cried, pressing his small hands against mine as he whispered, "Mama, one day I'll take care of you." I promise. That promise became the thread that held me together. Through every exhaustion, through every doubt, I clung to it. And somehow, my son grew into the kind of man I had always hoped he would be: strong, responsible, with a heart full of kindness. Today, he is married with children of his own. Seeing him carry his daughter in his arms fills me with a pride so fierce it almost hurts. His wife, Clara, stands beside him, a tall, elegant woman with eyes that reveal little. She greets me politely, always with a soft smile and the right words. But there is a distance there, like glass between us. At first, I told myself it was just her nature, perhaps shyness, perhaps the awkwardness of stepping into a family not her own. I gave her the benefit of the doubt, eager to welcome her into my heart, but I should have listened closer to the silence in her eyes. At first, I thought it was just shyness. I had no idea how deep her resentment ran. Family dinners were always sacred to me. They were more than food on a table, they were a way of holding the family together, thread by thread. I'd spend the entire afternoon in my kitchen, stirring pots that filled the house with the aromas of garlic, onions sizzling in oil, and the slow simmer of chicken stew that had once been my husband's favorite. Cooking for my family gave me joy, a sense of purpose, but soon I began to notice the little things. Clara would sit down at the table with a smile so faint it looked painted on. She would push the food around her plate, lifting her fork as if tasting, but never truly eating. Sometimes she claimed she wasn't hungry. Other times she reached for bread instead of the dish I had carefully prepared. At first, I told myself not to think too much of it. Perhaps she wasn't used to my cooking. Perhaps her appetite was weak. Still, her eyes gave her away. Cold stares when she thought no one was looking, a subtle arch of her brow as though my flavors offended her. And when I tried to tell a story, perhaps about David's childhood, or something the children had done that week, there it was, the faintest sigh, a quick glance toward the clock, fingers tapping impatiently on the table. Tiny gestures, but sharp enough to pierce me. One evening, after she barely touched her meal again, I whispered to David in the kitchen, "Does Clara not like my cooking?" He chuckled lightly, brushing it off. "Mama, she's just tired. Work drains her." "Don't worry," I nodded, but deep down my heart sank. I should have trusted that instinct, that quiet ache telling me something wasn't right. Instead, I buried it, convincing myself it was all in my head. So I tried harder. I baked her favorite desserts after she once mentioned liking chocolate. I offered her tea just the way I thought she might prefer it. I listened intently when she spoke, searching for any bridge that could bring us closer, yet the more kindness I poured out, the more distance she seemed to create. My gestures fell flat, my efforts unnoticed. Every attempt to reach her felt like pressing my hands against a wall of ice. And though I tried to ignore it, one truth began to gnaw at me. The harder I tried, the colder she became. When I first married my husband, I was just a timid girl of 19, unsure of how to fit into his family. I still remember walking into my mother-in-law's kitchen for the first time, the smell of cumin and roasted peppers filling the air. She stood tall, her eyes sharp but kind, watching me as though weighing my worth. I was nervous, hands trembling as I tried to help her knead dough. But little by little, I won her over, not with words, but with respect. I learned her recipes, asked for her advice, and treated her not as a rival, but as the pillar of the family she truly was. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when we disagreed, but never once did I allow pride to stand between us. And with time she grew to love me as a daughter. That bond became one of the treasures of my life. It is because of that history, those lessons, that I struggled so deeply with Clara. I had expected, perhaps foolishly, that she and I would find the same path. That warmth could be passed down like an heirloom. Yet with Clara, every door I knocked on remained firmly closed. When I complimented her dress, she smiled thinly and changed the subject. When I tried to share old family stories, she would interrupt, steering the conversation elsewhere. And whenever I reached for David's attention, whether by recalling something from his childhood or simply serving him his favorite dish, I could feel Clara's eyes on me, sharp, watchful, almost resentful. It was a kind of rivalry I had never wanted, yet it hung in the air between us like smoke, invisible but suffocating. She seemed to see me not as a mother trying to offer love, but as a shadow threatening to steal hers. At first, I told myself it was insecurity, that she only needed time. But the suspicion began to grow inside me. Perhaps Clara did not see me as family at all. Perhaps in her eyes, I was not a bridge but a barrier, a competitor for the one man she wanted to claim entirely for herself. That thought cut me deeper than I wanted to admit. I had already lost a husband. I could not bear the thought of losing my son as well. Yet each day the distance widened, and each glance from her confirmed the fear I carried, and I began to realize I was not welcome in my own son's home. It was a Sunday afternoon when David called me, his voice bright with anticipation. "Mama, we're hosting a big dinner next week. Relatives, neighbors, everyone will be there. I want you to come." My heart lifted instantly. Family gatherings were my joy, a chance to see cousins I hadn't spoken to in months, to hear the children's laughter blend with the clinking of glasses and the rustle of dresses. I imagine the long table, already candles glowing, plates filled, voices rising like music. Without hesitation, I offered, "I'll bring my special dish, the one your father always loved." It was tradition. No family event ever felt complete without it. For days afterward, I planned carefully. I pulled out my old recipe card, edges frayed from years of handling, stained with tiny splashes of oil. I walked to the market early, choosing vegetables with care, pressing each tomato gently, smelling the herbs until I found the freshest. My kitchen filled with the familiar aromas of garlic, peppers, and spices blending in the pot. As I stirred, I hummed an old lullaby I used to sing to David, the same tune that had once calmed him when storms rattled our roof. But Clara, her reaction was different. When I mentioned my dish at their house, her lips tightened. She muttered under her breath, just loud enough for me to hear, "Those old-fashioned recipes." People prefer lighter food these days. Her words stung, though she masked them behind a forced smile. Old-fashioned. The word echoed in my head like an insult, as if the flavors of my past, the traditions I carried, no longer had a place at her table. I brushed it aside, telling myself not to be so sensitive. After all, maybe she was only nervous about hosting such a large group. Still, her tone lingered with me, sharper than the clatter of knives on the counter. That week, I poured my heart into every detail of the dish. I tasted, adjusted, and tasted again, determined it would be perfect. I thought of my mother, who once told me, "Food carries memory." Maria, it's how we remind people who they are, where they come from. I smiled, imagining David's face when he saw it on the table. My son had always loved it. Surely everyone else would too. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was how that dinner, which I had awaited with so much joy, would become the night that changed everything. I should have known that night would change everything. Asterisk. The evening of the dinner, I arrived early, cradling the heavy dish in my arms like it was something sacred. The smell of roasted peppers and slow-cooked chicken drifted upward, warming my chest with pride. I had wrapped the pot carefully, the way I used to when David was a boy and I'd carry food to his school events. Even then, nothing gave me greater joy than seeing his eyes light up at the first taste. The house buzzed with life. Laughter spilled from the living room. The clinking of glasses echoed down the hallway, and children darted around with shrieks of joy. Relatives and neighbors gathered, their voices weaving together in a tapestry of chatter. I felt my heart swell as I carried the dish into the dining room, setting it down at the center of the long table, candles flickering against the polished wood. Ah, Maria's famous recipe, one of the neighbors said with a smile. We've been waiting for this all week. I felt heat rise to my cheeks, embarrassed but proud. This was my role, the small way I could still hold my family together. But then it happened. Clara stepped forward, her heels clicking against the floor. Her smile was gone, her eyes sharp as broken glass. And before I could even greet her, her voice cut through the laughter like a blade. "Why do you always meddle? This is my home." The word struck me harder than a slap. The room fell silent, forks clattered against plates, and every face turned toward me. My hands, still resting on the lid of the dish, began to tremble so badly I feared I might drop it. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My throat closed tight, as though her words had stolen the very breath from me. All I could hear was the pounding of my heart, loud and merciless. David's voice broke the silence. "Clara, please, not now." She just wanted to help. His words stumbled, his face pale with panic, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. The humiliation clung to me like smoke, seeping into my clothes, my skin, my very soul. Neighbors whispered, eyes wide, while relatives shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. I stood frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe, as if the floor itself had swallowed me whole. That night, under the glow of candles meant for celebration, I felt something inside me collapse. In that single moment, my dignity shattered in front of everyone I loved. I walked home that night in silence. The streetlights stretched long shadows across the pavement, and each step felt heavier than the last. My dish, half emptied but untouched in spirit, weighed on my arm like a burden I could no longer carry. The cool night air should have soothed me, but all I could hear was her voice echoing, sharp and merciless. Why do you always meddle? This is my home. Her words replayed in my head like a cruel song on repeat. Each syllable carried the sting of rejection, the shame of being told, in front of family and neighbors, that I no longer had a place. I tried to steady my breath, but my chest ached, as though each inhale carried the taste of humiliation. When I reached my house, I set the dish down on the counter and sat at the kitchen table in the dark. I didn't turn on the light. The silence pressed against me, heavy and suffocating. I buried my face in my hands, and without warning, tears spilled onto my palms. My mind slipped back to years long gone, when David was just a boy. There were moments when he tested my patience. Times he came home with muddy shoes after I had just cleaned the floor, or when he forgot his chores and left me to carry water from the well alone. I would raise my voice, yes. I would scold him firmly, but always, always with love. Never once did I aim to humiliate him. I corrected, but I also held him afterward. I reminded him he was good, that mistakes did not make him unworthy. That's what family was supposed to be. Correction without cruelty. Guidance without shame. Love even in discipline. And yet that night, standing in Clara's home, I was given none of the mercy I had always tried to give. Instead, I was struck down, not in private, but before the eyes of everyone I knew. That was what cut deepest, not the words themselves, but the way they were delivered. Like I was nothing more than an intruder, a nuisance to be discarded. I lifted my head, staring into the darkness of my kitchen. The walls, once filled with laughter, now seemed to echo with loneliness. I whispered to myself, almost in disbelief, she could have spoken to me kindly. She could have told me in private. But she didn't. I never thought my own daughter-in-law would treat me worse than a stranger. The days that followed felt longer than any I had known. Each morning I still rose before the sun, but my steps were slower, my hands heavy. The garden that once filled me with peace now seemed lifeless, each plant drooping as though it too carried my shame. I would water the soil, but even the smell of fresh earth could not lift the weight in my chest. David didn't come. Not on Monday, not on Thursday, not even on Sunday, the day he always promised to visit, no matter how busy life became. The absence of his knock on my door echoed louder than any argument. I told myself he was caught up with work, with the children, with life. But deep down, I feared something else, that Clara's words had driven a wedge between us too wide to cross. I avoided the neighbors. Normally, I would greet them with a smile as I hung laundry on the line, chatting about the weather or their children. But now, When I heard footsteps or voices outside, I stayed hidden indoors. I imagined their whispers. Did you hear what happened at David's house? Poor Maria. The thought burned my cheeks with shame. Even my friends noticed. Teresa knocked one afternoon, her voice gentle through the door. Maria, are you well? We haven't seen you at church. I lied, saying I was tired, that I needed rest. But the truth was uglier. I didn't want their pity. I didn't want to see the reflection of my humiliation in their eyes. Alone in my kitchen, I would sit at the table, staring at the empty chair across from me. The loneliness seeped into me, filling every corner of my heart. Doubts crept in like shadows at dusk. Maybe Clara was right. Maybe I was meddling. Maybe I had overstayed my place in their lives. The thought gnawed at me, leaving me smaller each day, and yet, beneath the sorrow, beneath the endless replay of that night, something began to stir. It was faint at first, like an ember buried in ash, but it grew stronger with every tear, with every heavy silence, because sorrow has a strange way of reshaping itself. And in my chest, it was no longer just pain I felt, it was something harder, sharper, but sorrow slowly turned into something else, a quiet fire within me. It was Teresa who finally pulled me out of my silence. She had been my closest friend for more than 30 years, a woman who had known me when I was a bride, when I was a widow, and when I was struggling to raise David alone. One afternoon, she appeared at my door with a basket of warm bread and that steady gaze of hers that always seemed to pierce right through me. I tried to act as though everything was fine. But the moment she set the bread on the table and touched my hand, the dam inside me broke. My voice trembled as I told her everything: the dinner, Clara's scream, the silence that followed. My shame poured out in sobs I had held back for days. Teresa listened quietly, nodding now and then, her eyes never leaving mine. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and sighed. Maria, she said, her voice firm but kind, respect is not begged. It's taught. The words hit me like a bell ringing in the stillness. I stared at her, uncertain. Taught? I whispered. Yes, she continued. You've always given and given, thinking your kindness would make her see your worth. But some people mistake kindness for weakness. If you keep bending, she will keep breaking you. Stop bending. Her words lit something inside me. For weeks I had been drowning in sorrow, believing I was the problem, believing perhaps I had no place anymore. But Teresa's truth was clear. Clara didn't see me as family. She saw me as someone to control, someone to dismiss. That realization stung, but it also awakened me. I wiped my tears, my spine straightening. I could not change Clara's heart, but I could change my response. For the first time, I thought. Maybe it was time to teach her a lesson. I did not want revenge. Revenge corrodes the heart. What I wanted was something far simpler, far purer, my dignity restored. And so I decided to take Teresa's advice and stop bending. The first step was silence. Where once I had rushed to their house each time they needed me, I now waited. When Clara called to ask if I could watch the children just for a few hours, I smiled politely and said, I'm sorry, I have plans. Plans, of course, often meant nothing more than sitting in my garden, sipping tea, or mending old clothes. But they were mine, and that was enough. The second step was absence. I no longer brought food uninvited. I no longer appeared at their doorstep with baskets of fruit or warm pots of stew. The clatter of my footsteps on their porch, once so familiar, vanished. The third step was restraint. When David hinted that they needed help with housework, I offered only a smile. "You and Clara will manage," I said gently. And manage they did, though I could see the strain written on Clara's face each time I passed her in town. It was not cruelty. It was simply letting them feel the weight of all I had quietly carried for them. The babysitting, the cooking, the endless chores, I had given it freely, but it was never owed. And without it, their house began to feel the difference. For the first time in years, I felt lighter. Each "no" I spoke was like a stone lifted from my back. Each day of silence was a step toward reclaiming my place, not as a servant, but as a mother, as a woman worthy of respect. And soon, she would learn the weight of what she had taken for granted. It didn't take long for David to notice the change. My son had always been attentive, even if distracted by work and family life. He was used to me being present, helping with the children, filling their kitchen with the smells of stews and bread, lending a hand when things grew overwhelming. My absence left a silence even he couldn't ignore. One evening, he arrived at my door unexpectedly, the children trailing behind him. He kissed my cheek, but there was a furrow in his brow. "Mama," he asked, his voice tinged with concern, "why don't you come by anymore? The kids miss you, Clara." "Well, we all miss you." I felt the weight of his words pressing against my chest. For a moment, I wanted to tell him everything, the sting of Clara's words, the humiliation I still carried, the nights I lay awake replaying that dinner in my mind. But I stopped myself. I looked into his eyes, so much like his father's, and gave him only a small, tired smile. "I don't want to intrude," I whispered. The phrase hung in the air between us like smoke. He blinked, confusion flickering across his face. "Intrude? Mama, you could never intrude. This is your family. My home is always your home." I placed a hand over his, squeezing gently. "You say that, hee-ho, but sometimes it doesn't feel that way." My voice cracked, but I steadied it before the children could hear. David lowered his gaze, guilt shadowing his expression. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. I could see the turmoil in him, the battle between loyalty to his wife and love for his mother. It was a war one never wanted to force him to fight. So I released his hand and changed the subject, asking about work, about the children's studies. Still, the seed had been planted. I saw it in the way his eyes lingered on me, the way he hugged me tighter before leaving that night. He knew something was wrong, even if I refused to name it aloud, but I also knew the true awakening moment that would force Clara herself to face the truth had not yet come, and the real awakening was yet to come for Clara herself. I may not have been present in their home anymore, but word travels quickly in a family. Whispers found their way back to me, small observations shared by neighbors, hints dropped by David in conversation. And slowly the picture formed. Without my quiet, constant presence, their household began to feel the strain. Clara had never been fond of housework. That much I had noticed in passing her size when laundry piled up, The way she sometimes left dishes soaking in the sink for days, waiting until I happened to come by. But now, with me absent, she could no longer lean on my hands to keep everything in order, the laundry stacked high in baskets, spilling over in corners. Meals became rushed, thrown together, lacking the warmth that home-cooked food carries. The children complained at dinner, pushing food around their plates, murmuring, "Grandma makes it better." Those words, innocent from little mouths, were daggers to Clara's pride, and the children missed me. I knew it from the way their voices softened when they called me on the phone, asking, "Abuela, when are you coming?" Each time my heart ached, but I answered gently, "Soon, my loves, soon." David, too, began to notice. After long days at work, he came home expecting the same harmony he had always known. Instead, he found a weary wife and restless children. He started comparing, though he tried not to. I could hear the frustration in his voice when he mentioned it. "Clara, Mama always managed to keep things together. How hard can it be?" I imagined the look on Clara's face, then the fire rising in her eyes, the bitterness settling deeper. My silence had become louder than any argument I could have spoken. Without a single accusation, I had made her confront what she had taken for granted. Their house, once filled with the pretense of unity, began to echo with tension. The arguments between them became more frequent, sharp words bouncing off walls I had once filled with laughter. I didn't celebrate their struggles. That was never my intent. But a strange calm washed over me each time I thought of it. Perhaps now Clara would begin to see that respect is not a gift, it is a responsibility, and the cracks that once divided me from them began to divide them from each other. It came on quietly, like a shadow at the edge of the day. At first, I thought it was nothing, just tiredness from the weight I had been carrying in my heart. But then the fatigue grew heavier, my body betraying me in ways it never had before. One morning, as I stood in the garden watering the roses, the world spun suddenly, and I found myself gripping the fence, breathless and trembling. I tried to push through, as I always had. But soon, even climbing the stairs felt like carrying a mountain on my back. My legs wobbled, my hand shook when I held a teacup. I had never been one to complain, but the illness left me no choice. Word traveled quickly. Neighbors noticed when I failed to appear at church. When my windows stayed shuttered long past sunrise. Teresa came first, her knock gentle but firm. She carried a pot of soup, setting it down on my table without asking. Others followed, kind faces from the neighborhood, leaving baskets of fruit, fresh bread, even jars of honey. Their compassion touched me, but it also deepened my sorrow. I, who had always been the one to care for others, now sat frail and dependent, my strength a fading memory. It wasn't long before David found out. He arrived in a rush, his face pale, eyes wide with panic. The moment he saw me sitting weakly in my chair, a blanket around my shoulders, his hands flew to his face. "Mama, why didn't you tell me? Why did you keep this from me?" His voice cracked, trembling with guilt. I smiled faintly, brushing his cheek with my cold fingers. "I didn't want to worry you, Hee-ho. You already have so much on your shoulders." Behind him stood Clara. She hadn't wanted to come. I could see it in her stiff posture, in the way her eyes avoided mine. But she was there, nonetheless. standing in my doorway like an unwilling witness to the truth of my frailty, and though my body was weak, my spirit felt strangely steady. For the first time, David saw me not as the tireless mother who always held everything together, but as a woman who could no longer carry it all. In my weakness, I found unexpected strength. The evening stretched long, the room dimly lit by the amber glow of a single lamp on the knitstand. I rested against my pillows, wrapped in a shawl Teresa had knitted years ago. My breaths were shallow, but my mind was sharp. Listening to the muffled tension simmering at the foot of my bed, David's voice broke first. It was low, almost trembling, but firm with the weight of a son's anguish. "Clara," he said, "I can't stay silent anymore. You disrespected my mother in front of everyone. Do you know what that did to her? Do you know how deeply you've hurt her?" Clara stiffened in the chair beside him, her arms crossed tightly against her chest. For a long moment she said nothing, her gaze fixed on the floor. I watched the muscles in her jaw tense, her lips press thin, as though holding back a tide of words she was afraid to release. Finally, she spoke, her voice sharp but cracking at the edges. I felt like I could never measure up to her. The words hung heavy in the air, more startling than any scream. My heart fluttered, not from weakness this time, but from surprise. I had expected anger, excuses, perhaps even denial. But this? A confession born not of strength, but of fear. David leaned forward, disbelief in his eyes. "What are you talking about? She has never tried to compete with you. She only wanted to love you, to help us." Clara's shoulders sagged. Her eyes finally met mine, and in them I saw something unexpected: pain. Every time you praised her cooking, every time the children asked for her instead of me, every time she walked into this house and knew what to do better than I did, I felt invisible, like I wasn't enough, like she had already filled the role I was supposed to fill. Her voice cracked fully then, trembling like a child caught between anger and sorrow. I remained silent, my fingers tightening around the blanket. Inside me, emotions twisted: sympathy, disbelief, even a trace of guilt. I had never meant to overshadow her. My only intention was love, to give where I could, to hold the family together. Yet, without realizing it, my presence had become a mirror reflecting her insecurities. David shook his head, running a hand through his hair. "Clara, that's not her fault. That's yours to face." His words were sharp, but in them was truth. I lay quietly, my heart beating slow but steady. As her confession settled deep into me, her confession revealed a truth I hadn't seen before. The room felt unbearably still, as though the walls themselves leaned closer to catch every word. Clara's eyes darted between me and David, her face pale but flushed with something deeper, an emotion she could no longer keep buried. Her voice wavered at first, fragile like a child's. "I was jealous," she whispered. "Jealous of how close you and David are. Jealous of how he looks at you with admiration. How he always speaks of you like you're the center of the world. And every time I tried to make this house feel like mine, you were already there. You'd cooked the meals, tucked the children in, solved the problems. I felt like a guest in my own home." The words cut into me, not because they were cruel, but because they carried the raw ache of truth. I hadn't seen it before, blinded by my eagerness to give, to be useful. I thought I was helping. I thought I was lightening their load. But to her, my hands had not been helping hands. They had been shadows stretching across her walls. I inhaled slowly, letting the silence linger before I spoke. My voice was soft but steady, each word chosen with care. Clara, I never meant to compete with you. I never wanted to take your place or to make you feel small in your own home. I only wanted to love you, to love all of you. My life has always been about giving, about caring for those I hold dear. Perhaps I gave too much too often, without asking what you needed. Her eyes filled with tears, though she blinked them away quickly, as if ashamed to reveal weakness. You made it look so easy, she muttered. Being a mother, being a wife, being everything. And I felt like I could never reach that, like I would always be standing in your shadow. My heart softened, but it also ached. I reached for her hand, though she pulled it back slightly before letting it rest in mine. Her skin was cold, her fingers trembling. There is no shadow, Clara, I whispered. There is only love. But love cannot be forced, nor can respect. Both must be chosen. Her lips quivered, but she said nothing more. The confession hung between us, raw and unfinished, like a wound left open. And though my heart longed for reconciliation, I knew in that moment forgiveness would not come so easily. David had always been a quiet man, but when he finally decided to speak, his voice carried the gravity of stone. After days of strained silence in his home, he stood in the center of my living room, his face pale but determined. We cannot let this fester, he said, his voice breaking slightly. It's not just between us anymore. Everyone saw what happened that night. Everyone whispered about it. Mama's dignity deserves more than silence. Before I could protest, he announced his decision. He would call together the family and even the neighbors who had been there for a gathering of truth. My stomach tightened at the thought. The same eyes that had witnessed my humiliation would now watch me relive it. But David's resolve was firm, and deep inside, I knew this moment had to come. The night of the council arrived. The house buzzed with the murmur of relatives, the shifting of chairs, the hesitant coughs of neighbors who had been invited. I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap, feeling the weight of every gaze on me. Clara sat across the room, her face pale, her lips pressed tightly together. David rose, his voice clear. That night, my wife shouted at my mother. She humiliated her in front of all of you. Tonight, I will not ask you to judge, but to listen. His eyes shifted to Clara. Clara, you owe my mother more than silence. The room stilled. Clara's hands twisted in her lap before she finally stood. Her eyes flicked toward me, then down at the floor. When she spoke, her voice trembled. I was wrong, she said, barely louder than a whisper. I was cruel, and I let my own insecurities poison my heart. Maria, I humiliated you in front of everyone, and for that, I am sorry. Murmurs rippled through the room. My chest tightened as all eyes turned toward me. I hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing on my shoulders. My pride whispered to remain silent, but my dignity demanded I speak. Slowly I stood, my legs trembling but my voice steady. Clara, I said, my gaze sweeping across the gathered faces, respect for elders is not old-fashioned. It is timeless. It is the thread that holds families together. When it is broken, everything begins to unravel. The room fell utterly silent. No one shifted, no one dared to breathe too loudly. The air grew heavy with the weight of truth, and the silence that followed was heavier than the night she screamed at me. The silence after my words seemed to stretch into eternity. I stood there, the room heavy with unspoken memories, and something inside me cracked wide open. My throat tightened, and before I could stop myself, tears welled in my eyes. They fell freely, carrying years of sacrifice, years of loneliness, years of giving without ever asking for anything in return. I pressed a trembling hand against my chest. "Do you know," I whispered, my voice breaking, "what it cost me to raise David alone? I worked until my hands bled. I sold the last of my jewelry to pay for his books. I went hungry some nights so he could eat. Every dream I had for myself, I gave up for him. And I never regretted a moment, because he was my joy, my reason to keep breathing." The room blurred through my tears. I could hear sniffles among the relatives, the shifting of chairs as people lowered their heads in shame. My son, my David, stood frozen, his own eyes glistening. Then suddenly he moved, crossing the room and falling into my arms. He wept openly, clutching me as though afraid I might vanish if he let go. "Mama," he sobbed, "I'm sorry I let you suffer. I'm sorry I didn't protect you when you needed me most." I held him, my fingers brushing through his hair like when he was a child. My heart ached with both pain and pride, pain for the wound I had carried, pride for the man he had become. And then Clara. She had remained seated, her face pale, her lips trembling, but as David's sobs echoed through the room, something inside her seemed to break. She rose, then slowly, shakily, sank to her knees before me. Her eyes, red with tears, finally lifted to meet mine. "Maria," she whispered, her voice raw with shame. "I was blind. Blind with jealousy, blind with pride. I let my insecurities turn into cruelty. Please forgive me. I beg you." The sight of her kneeling struck me deeply. I had not sought to humiliate her in return, yet here she was, humbled by her own choices. My chest rose with a long breath. I reached down, placing a trembling hand on her shoulder. "I forgive you," I said softly, but my voice carried steel. "But never again confuse kindness with weakness." Her head bowed, and the room seemed to exhale at once, the tension releasing like a long-held breath. At last, justice and dignity returned to my soul. The days that followed felt different, lighter somehow, as though the air itself had shifted. Where once Clara's presence carried an edge of coldness, there was now a softer warmth, hesitant but sincere. She greeted me with gentler eyes, no longer clouded with suspicion. Small gestures began to emerge, gestures that spoke louder than any apology. One afternoon, I arrived at their home to see her setting the table for lunch. To my surprise, she pulled out a chair for me before I could reach it. Later, when I reached for a glass of water, she hurried instead to place a cup of steaming tea in my hands. It was sweetened just the way I liked it, with honey, not sugar. I stared at it for a moment, taken aback. That simple act carried more weight than grand words ever could. The children, too, seemed to sense the change. Their laughter bubbled brighter, their embraces tighter. They no longer whispered, "Abuela, when will you visit again?" Because I was already there, welcomed. Their small arms wrapped around my waist as if anchoring me back into the center of their world. Each giggle, each tug on my skirt, reminded me of why I had fought so hard to hold on to my place in this family. David's relief was visible in his smile. He no longer looked torn between the two women he loved most. Instead, he beamed when he saw Clara and me exchanging smiles over the dinner table, as though a long winter had finally thawed into spring. I noticed other details too. Clara listening when I spoke, not with impatience, but with curiosity. She asked about recipes, about traditions, about the stories I had once told that she had ignored. And when I finished speaking, there was no sigh, no glance at the clock, only a nod, a smile, a quiet acknowledgement that I mattered. It wasn't perfect, not yet. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. That something had shifted in all of us, and that was enough. And while their change brought me peace, I realized something greater. The true gift was not their newfound respect, nor their softened hearts. The greatest gift wasn't their change. It was my own strength rediscovered. With time, I began to see the quiet wisdom in the path I had chosen. For so long, I believed that patience meant enduring silently, that love meant giving endlessly. But I learned something else through my pain. Silence can be powerful. Distance, though it aches at first, can teach lessons sharper than anger ever could. When I stepped back, when I stopped offering myself at every turn, Clara began to see what my presence had truly meant. It was not through shouting, nor through demands, but through absence that she recognized the weight I carried for their family. That truth reshaped her, softening her edges, humbling her pride. David, too, changed. My son, who had once brushed off my worries with gentle excuses, became more attentive than ever. He visited more often, not just with the children, but alone, bringing me small gifts, a bag of fresh fruit, a new shawl, sometimes just his company. He lingered in conversation, as though wanting to make up for every moment he hadn't noticed the pain in my eyes. His presence became not just dutiful, but intentional, filled with gratitude he no longer kept hidden. Clara, for her part, grew quieter in the best way. No more sharp sighs, no more restless eyes wandering when I spoke. She listened. She asked questions. She even laughed with me, and though the sound was tentative at first, it slowly gained warmth. She still had her pride, most women do, but I began to see in her not a rival, but a woman learning, stumbling, trying. I reflected often in those days. I thought about the night of humiliation, the long weeks of silence, the illness that nearly broke me. And yet, without those shadows, we might never have reached the light. My lesson was carved deep, not only for them, but for myself. Kindness must have boundaries. Love, to be true, must stand tall, not crawl on its knees. Yes, the wound had healed. But like every deep cut, it left a scar, one I carry quietly, a reminder of where I've been and what I will never allow again. The wound healed, but the scar would always remind me of one truth. As I sit here now, telling you my story, I realize that life has a way of testing us in the most unexpected places. I never thought the sharpest wound of my old age would come not from strangers, but from within my own family. Yet it was in that very wound that I discovered truths I had forgotten, or perhaps had never truly known. Betrayal is bitter. It strips you bare, leaving you questioning your worth, your place, even your memories. And what makes it so unbearable is this: the deepest pain often comes from those we love. When the hand that once reached for your embrace becomes the hand that pushes you away, it feels like the earth beneath you gives way. That night when Clara's voice cut through the laughter, I thought I might never stand tall again, but resilience is a strange and powerful thing. It grows quietly, like a flower pushing through cracks in stone. In my sorrow, I discovered something precious. Dignity is something no one can take from you if you don't allow it. They may mock you, humiliate you, try to silence you, but dignity is not theirs to give or to steal. It lives in how you choose to carry yourself, even when your heart feels broken. And family. Family. How easily we assume that blood alone binds us. But no respect must be mutual, no matter the age. A mother deserves her son's loyalty, yes, but a daughter-in-law deserves compassion too. Bonds only grow strong when they are watered with respect, not poisoned with pride. If there is one thing I wish for anyone listening now, it is this: never tolerate humiliation. Not in your own home, not in the homes of others, not from those who claim to love you. Set your boundaries, hold your dignity, and know that you are worthy of respect simply because you exist. My story is not just mine, it belongs to every mother, every grandmother, every woman who has ever felt invisible in her own family. To you, I say, you are not alone. If my story touched you, please subscribe and leave your thoughts in the comments. You're not alone in this.